Chapter 12. In our society, it is just exactly reversed. If a man has felt it incumbent on him to be continent during his bachelorhood, then always after he is married he feels it no longer necessary to restrain himself. You see, the wedding journeys, this retirement to solitude which young people with the sanction of their parents practice, are nothing else than a sanction for lewdness. But the moral law, when it is broken, brings its own punishment. In spite of all my endeavours to make my honeymoon a success, it was a failure. The whole time was merely vile, shameful, and tiresome. But very soon it became also painfully oppressive. This state of things began almost at the first. I think it was on the third or fourth day I found my wife depressed, and I began to inquire what was the matter, began to put my arms around her, which I supposed was all she could possibly desire. But she pushed away my arm and burst into tears. What was it? She could not tell me, but she was depressed and downhearted. Probably her highly wrought nerves whispered to her the truth as to the ignominy of our relations, but she could not tell me. I began to question her. She said something about being homesick for her mother. It seemed to me that this was not the truth. I tried to console her, but said nothing about her mother. I did not realize that she was simply bored, and that her mother was merely a pretext. But she immediately complained because I said nothing about her mother, as if I did not believe her. She told me that she could see I did not love her. I accused her of caprice, and immediately her face changed. In place of melancholy appeared exasperation, and she began in the bitterest terms to charge me with egotism and cruelty. I looked at her. Her whole face expressed the utmost coldness and hostility, almost hatred of me. I remember how alarmed I was on seeing this. How is this? What does it mean? I asked myself. Love is the union of souls, and instead of this, what have we here? Why, it cannot be. This is not she. I did my best to soothe her, but I came up against such an insuperable wall of cold, venomous hostility that before I had time to think, something like exasperation took possession of me also, and we said to each other a quantity of disagreeable words. The impression of this first quarrel was horrible. I called it a quarrel, but it was not a quarrel. It was really only the discovery of the gulf which was in reality between us. Our passionate love had worn itself out in the satisfaction of the senses, and therefore we remained facing each other as we really were. In other words, two egotists, alien to each other, desirous each of getting the greatest possible pleasure out of the other. I called what took place between us a quarrel, but it was not a quarrel. It was only the consequence of the cessation of our sensuality, disclosing our actual relation to each other. I did not realize that this cold and hostile relationship was our normal relation. I did not understand this because this hostility in the first weeks of our marriage was very quickly hidden again from us by the rising of a newly distilled sensuality, that is to say, passionate love. And so I thought that we had quarrelled and become reconciled, and that this would be the end of it. But in the very first month during our honeymoon, very quickly came another period of satiety, and again we ceased to be necessary to each other, and another quarrel ensued. The second quarrel surprised me even more than the first. I said to myself, of course the first could not have been the result of chance, but had to be the result of necessity, and so with this, and there will be others. The second quarrel surprised me, the more because it proceeded from the most trivial cause, something pecuniary. But I never grudged money, and certainly could never have grudged any to my wife. I only remember that she made some remark of mine seem to be the expression of my desire to control her through money, to which I claimed an exclusive right. Something impossible, stupid, cowardly, and natural neither to her nor to me. I grew angry, and began to reproach her for her lack of delicacy. She returned the charge, and so it went on as before. And I perceived in her words and in the expression of her face and her eyes the same harsh, cold hostility as had surprised me the first time. I remember having quarrelled with my brother, my friend, even my father, but never did there arise between us such a peculiar venomous anger as was manifested now. But after a short time our mutual reciprocal hatred concealed itself again under our passionate love, that is, our sensuality, and I once more cherished the notion that these two quarrels had been mistakes which might be rectified. But when the third and the fourth quarrel ensued, I came to believe that it was not a mere chance, but that it had to be, and that it would still be so. And I was horror-struck at what was before me. In this connection I was tormented by the horrible idea that I was the only person who had this misfortune, and that no other couple had any such experiences as I was having with my wife. I had not then found out that this is a common lot, that all men think just as I did, that it is a misfortune exclusively peculiar to them, and so conceal this exclusive and shameful misfortune, not only from others, but also from themselves, and are unwilling to acknowledge it. It began with us at the very first, and kept on all the time, and grew more severe and more bitter. In the depths of my soul I from the very first felt that I was lost, that marriage had not turned out at all as I had expected, that it was not only not a happiness, but was something very oppressive. But like all other men, I was not willing to acknowledge this, and I should not acknowledge it even now had it not been for the sequel. And I concealed it not only from others, but even from myself. I am now amazed that I did not recognize my real position. It might have been seen in the fact that our quarrels sprang from causes so trivial that afterward, when they were ended, it was impossible to remember what brought them about. Reason was not quick enough to sophisticate sufficient pretexts for the hostility that constantly existed between us. But still more amazing was the insufficiency of the pretexts for reconciliation. Occasionally it was a word or an explanation, even tears, but sometimes, how shameful it is to remember it now. After the bitterest words exchanged, suddenly would come silence, glances, smiles, kisses, embraces. Abomination! Why was it that I failed to see all the vileness of this even then? Chapter 13. 2 passengers entered and began to settle themselves at the end of the carriage. He ceased speaking while they were taking their places, but as soon as they became quiet, he went on with his story, never for an instant losing the thread of his thoughts. "What is chiefly vile about this," he went on to say, "is that it is taken for granted in theory that love is something ideal and elevated, whereas in practice love is something low and swinish, which it is shameful and disgusting to speak of or remember. You see, it was not without reason that nature made it shameful and disgusting. But if it is shameful and disgusting, then it ought to be so much the more to be made known. But with us, on the contrary, people pretend that what is low and shameful and disgusting is beautiful and elevated. What were the first symptoms of my love? Why, these: that I gave myself up to animal excesses, not only not feeling any shame at it, but feeling a certain pride at the possibility of these animal excesses, not thinking either of her spiritual life or even of her physical life. I wondered what was the cause of our animosity to each other, but the thing was perfectly clear. This animosity was nothing else than the protest of human nature against the animal, which was crushing it. I was amazed at our hatred of each other, but you see it could not have been otherwise. This hatred was nothing else than identical with the hatred felt by the accomplices in a crime, both for the instigation and for the accomplishment of the deed. What else was it than a crime, when she, poor thing, became pregnant within the first month, and our swinish relations continued? You think that I am wandering from my story. Not at all. I am all the time relating to you how I killed my wife. At my trial I was asked why and how I killed her. Fools! They think that I killed her with a dagger on the 17th of October. I did not kill her then, but long before. In exactly the same way they are all killing their wives now. All! How so? I asked. It is something amazing that no one wishes to know what is so clear and evident, what doctors ought to know and to proclaim, but they hold their tongues. You see, it is really awfully simple. Men and women are like animals, and they are so created that after sexual union, pregnancy begins, then suckling, a condition of things during which sexual union is dangerous both for the woman and for the child. The number of women and of men is about even. What does that signify? Of course it is clear. It does not require great wisdom to draw from these things the conclusion which animals also draw, that continence is necessary. But no, science has gone so far as to discover certain corpuscles which run about in the blood and all sorts of useless stupidities, but it cannot comprehend this yet. At least it is not rumoured about that science is saying this. And now for women, there are only two methods of escape. One is by making monsters of themselves, by destroying or annihilating in themselves, according to the requirement of the case, the faculty of being women, that is to say mothers, so that men may have no interruption of their enjoyment. The second escape is not an escape at all, but a simple, brutal, direct violation of the laws of nature. Such is constantly taking place in all so-called virtuous families, and it is this. The woman, in direct opposition to her nature, is obliged, while bearing and nursing a child, to be at the same time her husband's mistress, is obliged to be what no other animal ever permits. And she can't have the strength for it. Hence in our social sphere, hysteria and nerves, and among the people, women possessed. You've observed among girls, pure girls, I mean, there is no such thing as possession. It is only among peasant women and among women who live with their husbands. So it is with us, and it is exactly the same in Europe. All the hospitals are full of hysterical women who have broken the laws of nature, and these possessed women and the patients of Charcot are perfect cripples, and the world is full of half-crippled women. Only to think what a mighty thing is taking place in a woman when she has conceived, or when she is nursing a baby. That which is growing is to continue ourselves, is to take our place, and this holy function is violated. For what? It is terrible to think about it. And yet they talk about the freedoms, the rights of women. It is just the same as if cannibals should feed up their prisoners for food, and at the same time assert that they were working for their freedom and rights. All this was new and surprised me. "But what would you do?" I exclaimed. "If this came about, then a husband could have intercourse with his wife only once in 2 years. But a man—" Yes, a man must have it," said he, taking the words out of my mouth. "Again the priests of science support you in your views. Suggest to a man that vodka, tobacco, opium are indispensable to him, and all that sort of thing will become indispensable to him. It means that God did not understand what was needful, and that therefore, as he did not ask advice of the Magi, he arranged things badly. Pray observe, the thing does not hang together. It is needful, it is indispensable for a man to satisfy his carnal desires. So they decide. But here comes in the question of conception and nursing babies, which prevents the satisfaction of this necessity. How is the difficulty to be overcome? How manage it? Why, go to the Magi. They will arrange it. They have thought it all out. When shall these Magi be dethroned from their deceptions? It is time. You see how far things have already gone. Men become mad and shoot themselves, and all from this one cause. And how could it be otherwise? Animals seem to know that their progeny perpetuate their kind, and they observe a certain law in this respect. Only man has not the wisdom to know this, and does not wish to know it. All he cares for is to have the greatest possible pleasure. And who is he? He is the Tsar of nature. He is man. Pray observe, animals enjoy intercourse only when there is to be progeny, but the vile Tsar of nature does it only for pleasure's sake, and at any time, and moreover he idealizes this monkey-like business, and calls it the pearl of creation, love. In the name of this love, that is to say, this vileness, he destroys, what, 1/2 of the human race? In the name of his gratifications, he makes of all women, who ought to be his coadjutors in this progress of humanity towards truth and happiness, enemies instead. Look around and tell me who everywhere acts as a hindrance to the progress of humanity. Women. And what makes them so? Nothing but this. Yes, yes, he repeated several times, and he began to shift his position to get out his cigarettes and to smoke, evidently desiring to calm himself a little. Chapter 14. Thus I lived like a pig, he continued in his former tone. The worst of it was that while I was living this vile life, I imagined that because I did not commit adultery with other women, therefore I was leading a perfectly virtuous family life, that I was a moral man, that I was in no manner to blame, but that if we had our quarrels, she was to blame. Her character. She was not to blame, of course. She was like all other women, like the majority. She had been educated in the way demanded by the position of women in our circle, and therefore, as all women, without exception, belonging to the leisurely classes are educated, and as they have to be educated. They talk nowadays about some newfangled method of female education. All idle words. The training of women is exactly what it must be in view of the existent, sincere and genuine notion of women universally held. And the education of women will always correspond to the notion of her held by men. Now, we all know what that is, how men look on women. Wein, Weib und Gesang. Wine, women and song, German. And so it goes in the verses of the poets. Take all poetry, all painting, all sculpture, beginning with erotic verse and naked Venuses and Phrynes, and you will see that woman is an instrument of pleasure. Such she is at Truba and at Grafchika, and at the finest ball. And mark the devil's subtlety, pleasure, satisfaction. Then let it be understood that it is merely pleasure, that woman is a sweet morsel. In the early days, knights boasted that they made divinities of women, apotheosized them, and at the same time they looked on them as the instruments of their pleasure. But nowadays men declare that they respect women. Some relinquish their places to them, or pick up their handkerchiefs. Others admit their rights to occupy all responsibilities, to take part in government and the like. They do all this, but their view of them is always the same. She is still the instrument of enjoyment. Her body is the means of enjoyment. And she knows all that. It is just the same as slavery. Slavery is nothing else than the enjoyment by the few of the compulsory labour of the many. And in order that slavery may come to an end, people must cease desiring to take advantage of the compulsory labour of others, must consider it sinful or shameful. But while they take away, while they abolish the external form of slavery, while they so arrange it that it is no longer possible to buy and sell slaves in the market, and they believe and persuade themselves that slavery is abolished, they do not see, and they do not wish to see, that slavery still exists, for the reason that people, just the same as ever, like to profit by the labour of others, and consider it fair and honourable to do so. And as long as they consider this to be fair, there will always be men who will be stronger and keener than others, and will be able to do so. So it is with the emancipation of women. The slavery of woman consists in precisely this, that men desire to take advantage of her as an instrument of enjoyment, and consider it a right to do so. Well, and now they emancipate woman. They give her all rights the same as to men. But they still continue to look on her as an instrument of enjoyment. And so they educate her with this end in view, both in childhood and by public opinion. But all the time she is just the same kind of a dissolute slave as before, and her husband is just the same kind of a dissolute slave owner. They emancipate women in the colleges and in the law courts, but they look on her still as an object of enjoyment. Train her as she is trained among us to regard herself in this light, and she will always remain a lower creature. Either she will, with the assistance of villainous doctors, prevent the birth of her offspring, in other words, she will be a kind of prostitute, degrading herself, not to the level of a beast, but to the level of a thing, or she will be what she is, in the majority of cases, heartsick, hysterical, unhappy, without the possibility of spiritual development. Gymnasia and universities cannot change this. It can be changed only by a change in the way men regard women, and the way women regard themselves. It can be changed only by woman coming to regard virginity as the highest condition, and not as it is now regarded as a reproach and disgrace. Until this comes about, the ideal of every girl, whatever her education, will still remain that of attracting to herself as many males as she can, in order that she may have a possibility of choice. The fact that one girl understands mathematics and another can play on the harp does not change this in the least. A woman is fortunate and attains all that she can desire when she obtains a husband, and therefore the chief task of woman is to learn how to bewitch him. So it has been, and so it will be. Just as this was characteristic of the maiden's life in our circle, so it continues to be even after she is married. In the maiden's life, this was necessary for a choice. In the married woman's life, it is needed for her ascendancy over her husband. The only thing which destroys this, curtails it for the time being, is the birth of children, and this is when she is not a monster. In other words, when she nurses her children. But here again the doctors interfere. In the case of my wife, although she wanted to suckle her first baby, and though she suckled the next 5, the state of her health seemed precarious, and these doctors, who cynically undressed her and felt her all over, for which service I was obliged to be grateful to them and to pay money, these gentle doctors found that she ought not to nurse her child. And so she, this first time, was deprived of the sole means of saving herself from coquetry. She hired a wet nurse. In other words, we took advantage of the poverty, needs, ignorance of another woman, decoyed her away from her own child to ours, and in payment for this gave her a headdress with laces. But that is not the point. The point is that during this period of emancipation from bearing and nursing babies, the female coquetry, which had hitherto lain dormant, manifested itself in her with greater strength, while correspondingly in me there appeared with especial violence the pangs of jealousy, which unceasingly tore me during all my married life, as they cannot fail to tear all husbands who live with their wives as I live with mine, that is to say, unnaturally. Chapter 15. During the whole course of my married life, I never ceased to experience the pangs of jealousy, but there were periods when I suffered from them with especial acuteness, and one of these periods was after the birth of my first child, when the doctors forbade her to suckle it. I was especially jealous at this time. In the first place, because my wife suffered from that uneasiness characteristic of mothers, which is calculated to make an unreasonable interruption of the regular course of life. Secondly, because when I saw how easily she renounced the moral responsibilities of a mother, I naturally, even though unconsciously, concluded that it would be equally easy for her to renounce the duties of a wife, the more so because she was perfectly healthy, and notwithstanding the prohibition of the dear doctors, she nursed the other children and nursed them excellently. "But you don't seem to like doctors," said I, for I had noticed a particularly bitter tone in his voice every time he mentioned them. "This is not a matter of love or of hate. They ruined my life, as they have ruined and will continue still to ruin the lives of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people, and I cannot help connecting cause and effect. I understand that they, like lawyers and others, must earn money to live on, and I would willingly give them half of my income, and if it were only realized what they were doing, everyone else would also, I am convinced, give a half of his property, on condition that they would not meddle with our family lives, and would never come near us. I've never collected any statistics. Still I know of a dozen cases, a multitude of them, in which they have killed the unborn child, declaring that the mother would not live if the child were born, and yet afterward the mother was admirably fortunate in childbearing. And again they have killed the mother under the pretext of some operation or other. You see, no one reckons up these murders, just as no one ever reckoned the murders of the Inquisition, because it has been supposed that this was done for the benefit of humanity. It is impossible to count the crimes committed by them. But all these crimes are nothing compared to the moral corruption of materialism which they introduced into the world, especially through women. I say nothing about the fact that if we should follow their prescription, then thanks to the infection everywhere, in everything, People would have to separate instead of drawing closer together. They would have, according to the teachings of the doctors, to sit apart and never let the atomizer with carbolic acid out of their mouths. Lately, however, they have discovered that even this is of no special use. But this is not to the point. The principal poison lies in the demoralization of the people, women especially. Today it is no longer enough to say, "You are living a bad life, live better." You can't say that to yourself or to another man. But if you are living a bad life, then the cause for it lies in the abnormal state of the nervous functions and the like. And you have to consult the doctors, and they prescribe for 35 kopecks worth of medicine at the apothecary's, and you take it. You will grow even worse, then have to take new drugs and consult other doctors. An excellent dodge. But that is not to the point. I only say that she suckled the children admirably, and that the only thing that saved me from the pangs of jealousy was her bearing and nursing her children. If it had not been for that, the inevitable end would have come about earlier. The children saved me and her. During 8 years she gave birth to 5 children, and all except the first she nursed herself. "Where are your children now?" I asked. "My children?" he repeated, with a startled look. "Forgive me, perhaps this question caused you painful memories." "No, it's of no consequence. My sister-in-law and her brother took charge of my children. They would not give them to me. You see, I am a kind of insane man. I'm going away from them now. I've seen them, but they won't give them to me. For if they did, I should educate them so that they should not be like their parents. But it is necessary that they should be the same. Well, what is to be done? I can understand why they should not give them to me or trust me. And besides, I don't know as I should have the strength to bring them up. I think not. I am a ruin, a cripple. One thing I have. I know. Yes, it is manifest that I know what it will be a long time before the rest of the world know. Yes, my children are alive, and are growing up to be just such savages as all the rest around them are. I have seen them. 3 times I have seen them. I can't do anything for them, not a thing. I am going now to my own place in the south. I have a little house and a little garden there. Yes, it will not be soon that people will know what I know. It will soon be easy to find out how much iron and what other metals there are in the sun and the stars. But what shall cure our swinishness? That is hard, awfully hard. You have listened to me, and even for that I am grateful.
Chapter 16.
You just mentioned the children. There again, what terrible lying goes on concerning children. Children are a divine benediction. Children are a delight. Now this is all a lie. All this used to be so, but now there is nothing of the sort, nothing at all. Children are a torment, and that is all. The majority of mothers feel so, and some of them do not hesitate to say so, up and down. Ask the greater number of mothers of our circle, people of means, and they will tell you that from terror, lest their children should sicken and die, they do not wish to have children. If they are born, they do not wish to suckle them, lest they should grow too much attached to them and cause them sorrow. The delight which the child affords them by its beauty, its tiny little arms, its little feet, its whole body, the satisfaction afforded, is less than the agony of apprehension which they experience. I do not say from illness or the loss of the child, but from the mere apprehension of the possibility of illnesses and death. Having weighed the advantages and disadvantages, it seems to be disadvantageous, and therefore that it is not desirable to have children. They say this openly, boldly imagining that these sentiments grow out of their love to their children, good, praiseworthy feelings in which they take pride. They do not notice this, that by this reasoning they directly renounce love and assert their egoism. For them there is less pleasure from the charm of a child than suffering from apprehension for it.
and therefore they don't desire a child which they would come to love.
They do not sacrifice themselves for the beloved creature, but they sacrifice for themselves the beloved creature that is to be. It is clear that this is not love, but egoism. But it is not for me to criticize these mothers of well-to-do families for their egoism, when you think of all they endure from the health of their children in our modern fashionable life, thanks again to these same doctors.
How well I remember, even now, our life and the conditions of our life during the first period of our marriage,
when we had 3 or 4 young children, and she was absorbed with them. It fills me even now with horror. It was no kind of a life. It was a perpetual peril. Rescue from it, followed by new peril, then new and desperate endeavours, and then a new rescue. All the time as if we were on board a sinking ship. It sometimes seemed to me that this was done on purpose, that she was pretending to be troubled about her children so as to get the upper hand of me. So alluringly, so simply all questions were decided for her advantage. It seemed to me sometimes that all she said and did in these circumstances was done on purpose. But no, she herself suffered terribly, and kept tormenting herself about the children, and about the care of their health, and about their illnesses.
It was a torture for her and for me also, and it was impossible for her not to torment herself.
You see, her attachment to her children, the animal instinct to nurse them, to fondle them, to protect them, was in her, as it is in the majority of women. But she had not what animals have, a freedom from imagination and reason. A hen has no fear of what may befall her chick. She knows nothing about the diseases which may come upon it, knows nothing of all those remedies which men imagine they can employ to keep away sickness and death. And for the hen, the young ones are no torment. She does for her chicks what is natural and pleasant for her to do, and her young are a delight to her. When the chicken shows signs of sickness, her duties are distinctly determined. She warms and nourishes it, and in doing this, she knows that she's doing her duty. If the chicken dies, she does not ask herself why it died, where it is gone to. She cackles for a while, then stops and goes on living as before. But for our unhappy women, and for my wife, there was nothing of the kind.
Then, besides the question of diseases and how to cure them, of how to educate them, how to develop them, she had heard from all sides and had read endlessly varied and contradictory rules.
You must feed it this way. No, not this way, but so. How to dress it, what to give it to drink, when to bathe it, when to put it to sleep, when to take it out to walk. Ventilation. In regard to all this, we, and she especially, learn new rules every week. Just as if children began to be born only yesterday. Why, some child was not fed quite properly, or wasn't bathed at the right time, and it fell ill, and it showed that we were to blame, that we had not done what we should have done. Even when children are well, they are a torment. But when they fall ill, why then, of course, it is a perfect hell. It is presupposed that sickness may be cured, and that there is such a science, and there are such men, doctors, and that they know. Not that all know, but that the best of them do. And here is a sick child, and it is requisite to get hold of this man, the very best of his profession, who can cure, and the child is saved. And if you don't get hold of this doctor, or if you don't live where this doctor lives, then the child is lost. And this belief was not exclusively confined to my wife, but it is the belief of all the women of her sphere, and on all sides she hears such talk as this. 2 of Yekaterina Semyonova's children died because they did not call Ivan Sakharich in time. But Ivan Sakharich saved the life of Mara Ivanova's oldest daughter, and here the Petrovich children were sent in time to different hotels by this doctor's advice, and so their lives were saved. But those that had not been isolated died, and such a woman had a feeble child, and by the doctor's advice they took itself, and it lived. How can one fail to torment oneself and grow excited all one's life long, when the life of her children, to whom she is devotedly attached, depends on her knowing in time what Ivan Sakharich will say about it? But no one knows what Ivan Sakharich will say, least of all himself, because he knows very well that he knows nothing at all, and cannot give any help. and he only tergiversates at haphazard merely in order that people may not cease to believe in his knowledge.
You see, if she had been simply an animal, she would not have tormented herself so, while if she had been a normal human being, then she would have had faith in God.
She would have thought and spoken as true believers say. God gave, and God has taken, and one can't escape from God. So our whole life with our children was no joy, but a torment for her, and therefore for me also. How could we help tormenting ourselves? And she constantly did torment herself. It used to be that just as we were calming down from any scene of jealousy or a simple quarrel, and were planning to begin a new life, to read something and do something, and had only got fairly started, word would suddenly be brought that Vasya was vomiting,
that Masha had the dysentery, or that Andrusha had a rash, and the end of it was that we had no kind of a life.
Where should we send? What doctor should we get? In which room should we isolate the patient? And then began the enemas, the taking of temperatures, the medicines, and the doctors. And this would scarcely be done with before something else would begin. There was no regular family life. But as I've told you, there was a constant apprehension from real or fancied dangers. And that is the way it is in most families. In my family it was especially pronounced. My wife was affectionate and superstitious. Thus it was that the presence of children not only did not improve our life, but poisoned it. Moreover, the children gave us a new pretext for quarrelling. From the time we began to have children, and the more in proportion as they grew up, the more frequently our children became the very means and object of our quarrels, not only the subject, but the very instrument of dissension. We, as it were, fought each other with our own children as weapons.
Each of us had his own favourite child as a weapon of attack. I made more use of Vasha, the eldest, and she of Lisa.
Later, when the children had begun to grow up and their characters formed, it came about that they took sides with us according as we were able to attract them. They suffered terribly from this state of affairs, poor little things. But we, in our incessant warfare, had no time to think of them. The little girl was my special ally. The oldest boy, who resembled his mother and was her favourite, often seemed hateful to me. Chapter 17. Well, thus we lived. Our relations grew more and more hostile, and at last it went so far that difference of views no longer produced enmity, but that enmity produced difference of views. Whatever she said, I was ready in advance to disagree with her, and so it was with her. In the 4th year, it was fairly admitted by both of us, though tacitly, that we could not understand each other, and that we could not agree. We ceased to make any attempt to talk anything over to the end. In regard to the simplest things, especially the children, we each kept our own opinion unchangeably. As I now remember, the opinions which I advocated were not so precious in my sight that I could not give them up. But she had opposing notions, and to yield to them meant to yield to her, and this I could not do. Nor could she yield to me. She evidently counted herself always perfectly right toward me, and as for me, I was always a saint in my own eyes, compared to her. When we were together, we were almost reduced to silence, or to such conversations as I'm convinced the beasts may carry on together. What time is it? Is it bedtime? What will you have for dinner today? Where will you drive? What is the news? We must send for the doctor. Masha has a sore throat. It required only to step a hair's width beyond this unendurably narrowing circle of conventional sentences in order to inspire a dissension. Skirmishes and expressions of hatred regarding the coffee, the tablecloth, the drive, the course of the game of bridge. In fact, over trifles which could not have had the slightest importance for either of us. In me, at least, hatred of her boiled terribly. I often looked at her when she was drinking tea, waving her foot or conveying her spoon to her mouth, sipping from it and swallowing the liquid, and I hated her for this very trifle, as if it were the worst of crimes. I did not notice that these periods broke out in me with perfect regularity and uniformity, corresponding to the periods of what we called love. A period of love, then a period of hatred, an energetic period of passion, then a long period of hatred, a feebler manifestation of passion, then a briefer outbreak of hatred. We did not then comprehend that this love and hatred were one and the same animal passion, only with opposite poles. It would have been horrible to live in this way if we had realized our situation, but we did not realize it, and did not see it. In this lie, the salvation as well as the punishment of a man is that when he is living irregularly, he may blind himself so as not to see the wretchedness of his situation.
Thus it was with us. She endeavoured to forget herself in strenuous and ever-absorbing occupations, her housekeeping, the arrangement of the furniture, dressing herself and the family, and the education and health of the children.
I had my own affairs to tend to. Drinking, hunting, playing cards, going to my office. We were both busy all the time. We both felt that the busier we were, the more annoyed we might be with each other. "It's very well for you to make up such grimaces," I would think mentally, addressing her. "How you tormented me all night with your scenes. But I have a meeting to attend." "It's all very well for you," she would not only think, but even say aloud. "But the baby kept me awake all night long." These new theories of hypnotism, mental diseases, hysteria, are all an absurdity. Not a simple absurdity, but a vile and pernicious one. In regard to my wife, Charcot would have infallibly said that she was a victim of hysteria, and he would have said of me that I was abnormal, and probably he would have tried to cure us. But there was no disease to cure. Thus we lived in a continual mist, not cognizant of the situation in which we found ourselves. And if the catastrophe which overtook us had not occurred, I should have continued to live on till old age in the same way.
And on my deathbed I should have even thought that I had lived a good life.
Not remarkably good, but not at all a bad life, like that of all other men. I should never have understood that abyss of unhappiness and that abominable falsehood in which I was floundering. We were like two convicts, fastened to one chain and hating each other, each poisoning the life of the other and striving not to recognize the fact. I did not then realize that 99% of married people live in the same hell as mine, and that it must infallibly be so. I did not then realize that it was true of others, or true of myself. It is amazing what coincidences may be found in a regular and even in an irregular life. Thus, when parents are beginning to find that they are making each other's lives unendurable, it becomes imperative that they go to the city for the better education of their children. And so it was we found it necessary to move to the city. He stopped speaking, and twice gave vent to those strange sounds, which this time were quite like repressed sobs. We were approaching the station. "What time is it?" he asked. I looked at my watch. It was 2:00. "Aren't you tired?" he asked. "No, but are you not tired?" "I am suffocating. Permit me, I will go out and get a drink of water." And he got up and went staggering through the carriage. I sat alone, cogitating over what he had told me, and I fell into such a brown study that I did not notice him when he returned through the other door. Chapter 18. "Yes, I all the time wander from my story," he began. "I have pondered over it a good deal. I look on many things in a different way from what most do, and I want to talk it all out. Well, we began to live in the city. There a man may live a century and never dream that he has long ago died and rotted. One has no time to study himself. This time is wholly occupied. Business, social relations, his health, art, the health of his children, and their education. Now he must receive calls from such and such people, and must return them. Now he must see this woman, and hear some famous man or woman talk. You see, at any given moment there will be in the city surely one celebrity, and generally several, whom it is impossible for you to miss. Now you have to consult a doctor for yourself, and for this one or that, and then you have to see one of the tutors or the governors, and life is frittered away. Well, so it was we lived, and suffered less from our life together. Moreover, we had at first the charming occupation of getting settled in a new city and new quarters, and then again in travelling back and forth between the city and the country. Thus we lived one winter, and during the second winter the circumstance which I am going to relate took place. And though it seemed a trifling thing and attracted no attention, still it brought about all that succeeded. She became delicate in health, and the doctors forbade her to have any more children, and they taught her how to prevent it. This was repulsive to me. I had no patience with such an idea, but she, with frivolous obstinacy, insisted on having her own way, and I had to yield. The last justification of the swinish life, children, was taken away, and our life became viler than ever. To the muzhik, to the labouring man, children are a necessity. Although it is hard for him to feed them, still he must have them, and there the marital relations are justified. But to us, who already have children, more children are not a desideratum. They cause extra work, expense, further division of property. They are a burden, and therefore there is no justification for us of the swinish life. Either we artificially prevent the birth of children, or we regard children as a misfortune, as the consequence of carelessness, which is worse. There is no justification, but we have fallen morally so low that we do not see the need of any justification. The majority of men now belonging to the cultivated classes give themselves up to this form of debauchery without the slightest twinge of conscience. No one feels any conscientious scruples, because conscience is a non-existent quality, except, if we may say so, the conscience of public opinion and of the criminal law.
And in this respect, neither the one nor the other is violated.
No one has to bear the brunt of public scorn. All do the same thing, both Mara Pavlovna and Ivan Sakharich. Why breed beggars or deprive oneself of the possibility of social life? Or is there any reason to stand in awe of the criminal law or to fear it? Ugly peasant girls and soldiers' wives may throw their babies into ponds and wells, and they, of course, must go to prison. But all that sort of thing is done by us, opportunely and neatly. Thus we lived 2 years. The means employed by the rascally doctors evidently began to take effect. Physically she improved and grew more beautiful, like the last beauty of the summer. She was conscious of this, and began to take care of herself. Her beauty became fascinating and disturbing to men. As she was in the prime of a woman of 30 and was no longer bearing children, she grew plump, stirring the passions. Even the sight of her made one uneasy. When she came among men, she attracted all eyes. She was like a well-fed and bridled horse which had not been driven for some time, and from which the bridle was taken off. There was no longer any restraint, as with 99% of our women. Even I felt this, and it was terrible to me. Chapter 19. He suddenly got up and sat down close by the window. "Excuse me," he exclaimed, and looking out intently, sat there for as much as 3 minutes. Then he sighed deeply, and again sat down opposite me. His face had undergone a complete change. There came a piteous look into his eyes, and a strange sort of smile curved his lips. "I'd grown a little tired, but I will go on with my story. There is plenty of time left. It has not begun to grow light yet. Yes," he began again after he had lighted a cigarette. "She grew plumper after she ceased to bear children, and her malady, the constant worriment over the children, began to disappear. Well, it did not really disappear, but she, as it were, awoke from a drunken stupor. She began to remember, and she saw that there was a whole world, a divine world, with its joys about which she had entirely forgotten, but in which she did not know how to live, a divine world which she did not understand at all. How keep it from being wasted? Time is fleeting, and it will not return. Thus I imagine she thought, or rather felt, and indeed it would have been impossible for it to be otherwise. She had been educated to believe that in this world there is only one thing worthy of anyone's attention: love. She had become married. She had got some notion of what this love was, but it was very far from being what had been promised, from what she expected. She had undergone the loss of many illusions. She had borne many sufferings, and then that unexpected torment. So many children. This agony had worn her out, and now, thanks to the obliging doctors, she had found out that it was possible to avoid having children. She was glad of that, made the experiment, and began to live for the one thing which she knew about, for the sake of love. But the enjoyment of love with a husband who was consumed with the fiery passions of wrath and jealousy was not the kind she wanted. She began to picture to herself another, a more genuine, a newer kind of connection. At least, that is what I imagine was the case. And so she began to look around, as if she were expecting something. I noticed it, and was correspondingly troubled. It kept all the time happening that she, talking, as her habit was with me, through the medium of others, that is to say, talking with strangers,
but making her remarks for my ears,
expressed herself boldly, never at all dreaming that she, an hour before, had said diametrically the opposite,
and expressed herself half seriously to the effect that that maternal solicitude was a delusion,
that there was no sense in sacrificing her life for her children, that she was still young and could still enjoy life. She really occupied herself less with her children, certainly with less of desperate solicitude, but she gave more and more attention to herself, occupied herself with her external appearance, although she tried to keep it secret, also with her pleasures and with her accomplishments. She once more enthusiastically took up her piano practice, which hitherto she had entirely neglected. That was the beginning of the end. He once more turned to the window, his weary-looking eyes, but straight away, evidently making an effort to control himself, he proceeded, "Yes, that man appeared." He hesitated, and twice produced through his nose his peculiar sounds. I saw that it was trying for him to mention that man, to recall him, even to allude to him. But he made an effort, and as it were breaking through the barrier which hindered him, he resolutely went on. A vile fellow he was in my eyes, in my estimation, and not because he played an important part in my life, but because he was really vile. However, the fact that he was bad serves merely as a proof of how irresponsible she was.
If it had not been he, it would have surely been someone else.
He again ceased speaking. Yes, he was a musician, a fiddler. Not a professional musician, but half professional, half society man. His father was a landed proprietor, a neighbour of my father's. His father went to ruin, and his children, 3 of them were boys, all managed to make their way. Only this one, the youngest, was entrusted to his godmother and sent to Paris. There he was sent to the conservatoire, because he had a talent for music, and he was graduated as a fiddler and played in concerts. He was the man— It was evident that he wished to say something harsh about him, but he restrained himself and said, speaking rapidly, "Well, I don't know how he had lived up to that time, but that year he appeared in Russia and came to my house. He had almond-shaped, humid eyes, handsome, smiling lips, little waxed moustaches, the latest and most fashionable method of dressing his hair, an insipidly handsome face, such as women call not bad. A slender build, though not ill-shaped, and with a largely developed behind, such as they say characterize Hottentot women. This, it is said, is musical. Slipping into familiarity as far as was permitted him, but sensitive and always ready to stop short at the slightest resistance with regard to external appearances, and with that peculiar touch of Parisian elegance caused by button boots and bright-coloured neckties, and everything else which foreigners acquire in Paris, and which by their character of novelty always attract women. In his manner there was a facetious external gaiety, a way, as you may know, of speaking about everything by means of hints and fragmentary allusions, as if the person with whom he was speaking knew all about it, and could fill out the missing links. Well, then, this man with his music was the cause of all the trouble. You see, at the trial the whole affair was represented as having been caused by my jealousy. This was not so at all. That is to say, it was not exactly so. It was, and it was not. At the trial it was decided that I had been deceived, and that I had committed the murder in defending my outraged honour. So they called it in their language, and on this ground I was acquitted. At the trial I did my best to explain my idea of it, but they understood that I had wished to rehabilitate my wife's honour. Her relations with that musician, whatever they were, did not have in my eyes that significance, nor in hers either. It simply had the significance I have already mentioned, that of my swinishness. All came from the fact that between us existed that terrible gulf of which I have told you, that terrible tension of mutual hatred, whereby the first impulse was sufficient to precipitate the crisis. The quarrels between us, as time went on, became something awful, and were remarkably striking, being mingled with intense animal passion. If he had not appeared, surely someone else would. If there had not been one pretext for jealousy, there would have been another. I insist upon it that all husbands living as I lived must either live wanton lives, or separate, or kill themselves, or their wives, as I did. If this does not occur in any given case, it is a rare exception. Why, before the end came, as I made it come, I was several times on the brink of suicide, and even she poisoned herself. Chapter 20. Yes, this happened not long before the crisis. We'd been living in a sort of armistice, and there was no reason for it to be broken. Suddenly a conversation began, in which I remarked that a certain dog had received a medal at an exhibition. She said, "Not a medal, but honourable mention." A dispute began. We began to reproach each other, skipping from subject to subject. "Well, I knew that long ago. It was always so. You said so-and-so. No, I said thus-and-so. Do you mean to say I lie?" There is a feeling that you are on the edge of a frightful quarrel, and that you will be tempted to kill yourself or her. You know that it will begin in the instant, and you dread it like fire, and you want to control yourself, but anger seizes on your whole being. She is in the same, or an even worse condition, and she deliberately puts a wrong construction on every word you say, giving it a false significance, and every word she speaks is steeped in poison. Wherever she knows I am most sensitive, there she strikes. The farther it goes, the more portentous it grows. I cry, "Silence!" or the like. She rushes from the room and takes refuge in the nursery. I try to detain her, so that I may say out my say and prove my position, and I seize her by the arm. She pretends that I hurt her and screams, "Children, your father is striking me." I cry, "Don't you lie." "And this is not the first time either," she cries, or something to that effect. The children rush to her. She tries to calm them. I say, "Don't pretend." She says, "For you, everything is pretense. You strike a woman and then say she is pretending. Now I understand you. This is the very thing you want." I shout, "Oh, if you were only dead!" I remember how horror-struck I was at those terrible words. I would never have believed myself capable of uttering such coarse, terrible words, and I am amazed that they leapt forth from my mouth. I shout out those terrible words and rush into my library, sit down, and smoke. I hear her go into the vestibule, preparing to go out. I ask, "Where are you going?" She makes no reply. "Well, the devil go with her," I say to myself, as I return to the library and again sit down and smoke. 1,000 different plans of how to avenge myself on her, and how to get rid of her, how to set everything to rights again, and how to act as if nothing had taken place, go rushing through my brain. And as I sit and think, I smoke, smoke, smoke. I conceive the plan of running away from her, of hiding myself, of going to America. I actually go as far as to dream of getting rid of her. And I think how delightful it would be, as soon as this is accomplished, to make new ties with some beautiful woman entirely new. I dream of getting rid of her by her dying or by securing a divorce, and I cogitate how this may be brought about. I see that my mind is wandering, that I am not thinking consecutively. But in order that I may not see that I am thinking the wrong kind of thoughts, and am entirely at sea, I smoke. But life at home goes on. The governess comes and asks, "Where is Madame? When will she be back?" The lackey asks, "Shall I serve tea?" I go into the dining room. The children, especially the oldest one, Lisa, who is already old enough to understand, look at me questioningly, disapprovingly. We silently drink our tea. Of her there is no sign. A whole evening passes. She does not come, and two thoughts mingle in my soul. Wrath against her because she is tormenting me and all the children by her absence, and yet she will return in the end, and fear that she will not come back, but will lay violent hands on herself. I should go out in search of her, but where to find her? At her sister's? But it would be stupid to go there with such an inquiry. Well then, God go with her. If she wants to torment us, let her torment herself also. That is the very thing she would like, and next time she will be worse.
But supposing she is not at her sister's, but has done something else, has even already laid hands on herself?
11 o'clock, 12 o'clock. I will not go into the sleeping room. It would be stupid to lie down there and wait alone. But I will lie down where I am. I try to occupy myself with some work, to write letters, to read. But I can't do anything. I sit alone in my library.
I torment myself with apprehensions.
I'm full of anger. I listen. 3 o'clock, 4. No sign of her. I fall asleep just before morning. When I wake up, there is no sign of her. Everything in the house goes on as usual, but all are in a state of dubiety and look questioningly and reproachfully at me, supposing that it is all my fault.
And within me is still the same struggle, anger because she torments me, and anxiety about her.
About 11 o'clock in the morning, her sister comes as her envoy, and she begins in the usual way. She is in a terrible state of mind. Now, what does it all mean? Something must have happened. I speak about the incompatibility of her temper, and I asseverate that I have done nothing. But you see that things cannot be allowed to go on in this way, says she. It's all her affair, not mine, I say. I shall not take the first step. If it be a separation, then let it be a separation. My sister-in-law goes away without getting any satisfaction. I have spoken boldly that I would not take the first step. But as soon as she is gone, and I see the poor frightened children, I am already prepared to take the first step. I should even be glad to do so, but I don't know how. Again I walk up and down and smoke, and after breakfast fortify myself with vodka and wine, and attain what I was unconsciously desirous of. I do not see the stupidity, the cowardice of my position. About 3, she returns. She meets me, but has nothing to say. I imagine that she has come to seek for a reconciliation, and I begin to tell her how I have been led on by her reproaches. She, with the same harsh, terribly harassed face, replies that she has not come to indulge in explanations, but to take the children away, that we cannot possibly live together. I begin to explain that I was not the one to blame, that it was she who had driven me out of my senses.
She looks at me, sternly, triumphantly, and then says,
"Say no more. You will be sorry enough." I reply that I cannot endure any comedy. Then she screams out something which I cannot comprehend and flees to her room, and she turns the key behind her. She has locked herself in. I knock. No answer. I'm full of wrath. I wait. At the end of half an hour, Lisa comes running in with tears in her eyes. What has happened? I cannot hear Mamma. We go to her room. I press against the door with all my might. The bolt happens to be not wholly pushed in, and both halves of the door yield. I hasten to the bed. She is lying on it in an uncomfortable position in her petticoats and boots. On the table is an empty opium bottle. We bring her to consciousness. Tears and ultimate reconciliation. But it is no reconciliation. In the soul of each of us is the same old anger against each other, and an additional sense of exasperation for the pain which this quarrel has caused and which each blames the other for. But this trouble must be somehow ended, and life goes on in its old grooves. But in the same way such quarrels, and even worse ones, take place regularly all the time, now with a week's interval, now a month's interval, now every day, and it is always the same thing. One time I even applied for a foreign passport. The quarrel had lasted 2 days. But there ensued a semi-explanation, a semi-reconciliation, and I stayed.